Hi, and welcome to CS Talks. I'm Sam Cochran, an architecture and design journalist here in New York, and it's my pleasure to join you to discuss 1228 Madison Avenue, one of New York's most exciting new residential buildings. I'm joined by its architecture team, Bob Stern, Paul Whalen, and Michael Jones of the renowned firm Robert A.M. Stern Architects. Their diverse body of work includes many of New York's most coveted addresses, including 15 Central Park West, 30 Park Place, and 220 Central Park South. Also joining us, the designer of 1228's interiors, Kelly Behun, of the AD100 and Elle Decor A-list firm Kelly Behun Studio. Celebrated for her playful, polished, and bespoke approach to interiors, Kelly has also conceived exclusive lines of furniture, lighting, rugs, and home accessories. And this project marks Kelly's multifamily residential debut. These two iconic design firms have come together to create a highly nuanced and intimately scaled building, located just one block from Central Park on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. 1228 Madison Avenue consists of 14 full-floor private homes and one duplex penthouse, and I'm so excited to learn more all about them. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. Bob, I'm going to start with you. 1228 Madison has been described as a return to confident architecture on the Upper East Side. Can you talk a little bit about your relationship to this neighborhood and how the area and its parks and museums may have influenced your design?
Sure, I'm happy to be here, by the way. It's a wonderful, I'm an architect, as are my partners, who believe in context. That doesn't mean we want to make buildings that mimic in a direct way what's around them, but that are sympathetic around them. Now, this is an extraordinary site that we were asked to design a building for, because on the same block, you have the Guggenheim Museum, which of course is the most anti-contextual building in New York, I would say. It was so received and so remains. But it is a great work of sculpture. And we are giving it, I hope, what will be perceived of as a proper backdrop. The upper floors of our building look over the museum. But I'd like to say a word or two about the neighborhood in general. It does contain some buildings that are kind of anonymous, a little plain vanilla, but many fewer plain vanilla buildings than most neighborhoods in Manhattan. It has a strong backbone of townhouses and apartment houses from the interwar period, which give great texture to the streets and in particular, and also to Madison Avenue and Fifth Avenue to a considerable extent. It's a real neighborhood. It's a kind of wonderful family neighborhood. You don't have so many in New York. It has shops along Madison Avenue, which is a very elegant street, but the shops sell real things to real people, which is very nice.
Yeah.
And it has wonderful institutions, particularly schools in the neighborhood right around our building and just a short walk away. So it's a very desirable context, and we've done as much as we think we could possibly do to take advantage of it as our building piles up toward the sky, reaches over, if you will, the Guggenheim for glimpses and views of Central Park, which is only a block away.
No, it's remarkable. And I think you're right. When people think about the Upper East Side, they think of a commitment to quality. You know, Paul and Kelly, I'm curious for you as well, when designing for New York, what your sources of inspiration might be and what you hope to achieve. We can start with you, Paul.
We think of ourselves as great students of the New York pre-war buildings. New York probably has the best collection of the world of high-rise pre-war buildings, and the quality of those apartments that were designed at the time have rarely been surpassed, perhaps until recently. And a couple of the buildings that we look at are shown up here on the screen. River House on the left is on the East River, and so it was designed not only to have a lovely scale at the bottom, but to be iconic from a distance. It actually had a boat dock at the bottom so that residents could get on their boat and go to their country house on Long Island, very convenient before the highway came in. But it is also a very clever building in the way that it uses traditional residential vocabularies, such as a bay window in a different way. Here, bay windows are stacked up to create dramatic vertical features that add to the apparent height of the building. It's something that it's really a very clever, smart building. And then 740 Park Avenue is, I think, famous as one of the greatest, perhaps the greatest of the pre-war buildings for the quality of the residences inside. It's more of a background building. It has beautiful detailing. It has rich materials. The whole building is limestone, whereas many pre-war apartment buildings were really brick with limestone. But this goes the whole way with limestone. It has great setbacks at the top. And importantly, the apartments are particularly, they're particular standouts in the way that they use a very consistent set of dimensions to put, so that every room has a relationship to every other room. So the plans are very important to us. And then moving forward to 770 Park Avenue, this is a great example. And this, by the way, is a Candela building, as is 740 Park. We love the way that this building steps back at the top to create a sense of individuality, a kind of a sense of hanging gardens. It's very romantic. It gives you the sense that if you live in New York, you can have it all. You can have great views out over the city. And you can also walk out onto your wonderful private balcony with a garden on it. In a way, the symbol of great city living in New York is to look up at that kind of a landscape of gardens and balconies. So also very influential to us. These three buildings, I think, are sort of touchstones to the way that we look at designing a building in New York.
Thanks so much. And Kelly, I'm going to redirect the question to you. I'm wondering about your inspiration and sort of your intentions for New York design.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo what Bob and Paul just said in terms of this particular neighborhood. It's such a full circle moment for me, because when I first moved to the city from Pennsylvania, Carnegie Hill was the neighborhood I lived in for 2 years. And I can't really say, what at the time, drew me to it, but clearly it was all these things that we've been talking about. There is this sense of neighborhood. There is this sense of a beautiful texture to it, a rhythm to it, that there is this like local florist and, the restaurants and the Central Park and all that it has to offer, but it felt like very much on a human scale. And I think that was what drew me. And it felt just kind of very comforting and welcoming for someone who is new to the city. And it maintains all of those charms to this day. I think for me, when I, early in my design career, I was not formally trained. I worked at Ian Schrager Hotels, and I had the great pleasure of working with two kind of giants of French design, Andre Putman there at the upper left and Philippe Starck. And I think, I'll never forget meeting Madame Putman when we were Ian was doing a redesign of Morgan's lobby. And it just, everything about her had really a profound impact on me. And I think, as I was looking back over these photos, I think also without even realizing the floors that are in the lobby at 1228 Madison are, I think for me, in a way, an homage to Andre Putman and her style, which was really about restraint and timeless elegance. But there were always these moments that, moments of surprise, which I think you see there in the rug, and, her very iconic bathrooms at Morgan's, where the rooms themselves were quite restrained. And then you would walk in and there was this, brilliant and graphic black and white checkerboard. And so it was those moments that I think made her interiors particularly memorable. And I think the last thing I'll say about inspiration is, I knew that working with Bob and Paul and Michael, I was expecting the scholarliness and the rigor that they bring to their practice. But I think what surprised me about them was the poetry. There's something really quite poetic about how they consider their buildings and how they sit within a particular neighborhood. And that for me was, really inspiring.
Yeah, no, there's a wonderful intuitive quality to all the firm's work. Even within the context of the Upper East Side, Madison Avenue has its own character. It's so often associated with retail. And Paul, I'm curious, what does it mean to design a sort of residential space on a storied thoroughfare such as Madison Avenue?
Madison is a really interesting street, especially as a residential street, because it's mixed use. It provides some of the best shopping in the world, as well as some of the best living in the world. It's kind of the Upper East Side's main street where everybody comes together. But from a formal point of view, I find it really interesting because it's so irregular.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike Park Avenue and Fifth Avenue that are more sort of great esplanades of wall-like buildings, interesting in that way, Madison is much more fragmented than that. And this image here that you see looking up Madison Avenue from 71st Street shows a church on the right, a great mansion, an apartment block beyond that, and then the Carlisle Hotel Tower off in the distance. And that kind of variety makes Madison, I think, particularly visually compelling.
Yeah.
And the low buildings in particular allow a lot of light into the street late in the afternoon in a way that other streets that are all tall buildings don't quite as much. And then if we go to individual buildings on the street, there are a lot of jewel box buildings on Madison. For instance, the until recently, the Hermes flagship store at 691 Madison Avenue was designed for Louis Sherry in 1929 by the great New York firm McKinley & White, is a great example of that firm stretching itself into a world of classicism or a kind of Art Deco and Regency and a French style quality to it. And it's wonderful that it still exists as a small jewel box and it hasn't been replaced by a taller building. So we're very aware of the interest that a jewel-like building like this brings to the street, and that we needed to be up to that level of interest. And then the storefronts themselves were also inspirational to us. Here's the Emilio Pucci storefront, where it's an example of where some of the best designers in the world are showing off their designs, and also best storefront designers in the world are putting together great displays so that the competition is intense on Madison Avenue for beautiful things, interesting things. But the storefront itself is also exquisitely designed. It's really a part of the design of the building. It's always there, regardless of who or what store this shopfront is rented out to. The sign goes up, but the storefront is always an integral part of the building. And then, so moving on to the design of the bottom of our building, we have, first of all, it incorporates a few different scales. We have a single-story element on the left side that rises up to a 3-story element that's sort of the size of a townhouse. Already we're incorporating the different scales of the street. We paid a lot of attention to the design of the storefronts with 3 Regency pediments, bringing a special quality to that storefront in the middle. And then right above that storefront, we have a living room marked by 3 windows. It is clearly a living room, the way that those 3 windows come together. In the same way that the street combines in a lovely way the idea of living and shopping at the same time, we wanted to do that on the facade of the building, express what makes the street so great. And then moving to the right, to the front door, we have an arch, and above that we have a kind of filigree of stone cutouts that are designed as intersecting circles. And those intersecting circles are in fact a leitmotif that we use through the entire building to pull the detailing together. You can see those circles then brought to the 2 sconces on either side of the door. Those are custom designed sconces, something that we love doing. And then down to the door below, where the circles create a kind of screen on the German nickel doors, which open up to the wonderful lobby that Kelly has designed.
Well, you make the excellent point. There's a rich history of innovation on this street, both at street level all the way up to the crown of the building. And obviously your collaboration marks a very bold partnership between 2 sort of strong design voices, Kelly B in studio and Robert Amstern architects. And I'm excited to learn a little bit more about what that process of working together was like. And Kelly, we can turn to you.
It was fantastic. I love working with these guys, and knew I had to bring my A game, and that I would learn a lot from them, and I have. I feel like it's, for me, with interiors, it's so much about a conversation between objects, and it creates, we talk about vibe. What's the vibe of the space? And for me, vibe is about like vibration. It comes from vibration. And so what does the room really feel like? How does it make you feel on a very primal emotional level when you inhabit it? And I think the relationship, one of the things that really, sold me on doing this, obviously, of course, just hearing to be able to work with Bob and his team. But I think the very fact that obviously we are somewhat of an improbable pairing, you wouldn't necessarily naturally someone says Robert Stern and you don't think Kelly Bean Studio. And that was, kind of the thrilling part for me, because it signaled to me that the developers were willing to maybe try something that felt a little bit, different. And so when I was always considering the architecture, always coming back to the architecture, but this idea of conversation between the architecture and the interiors, I think what I love about interiors, the architects have to they have more of a public conversation going on. So if you're thinking about it always as a conversation between objects, the architects have a public conversation and a duty to the neighborhood, and they're part of the permanent architectural landscape of Manhattan now. And that's a very weighty thing. And for me, what I love about interiors is that it's more of an inward private conversation. Anyone who goes up and down Madison Avenue will see this building in all its beauty. For me, the interiors, it's going to be the residents of the building and their family and friends who see it. And so it gives me the opportunity to be a little bit looser and freer and perhaps bring a more personal point of view to the interiors. And here's this moment where I'm saying it's a bit of an homage to what I think Andre Putman did so brilliantly, and that is to say, you don't really see it here, but at the entrance, what happens is you come through these beautiful doors through this facade, and there's immediately, a nice intimately scaled foyer. And the stone there's 4 different types of Italian marble. It's laid out in a very symmetrical fashion, as you would expect. But then what happens when you come into the lobby proper, I feel like it's almost like an exhale, because the pattern, as you see, becomes looser and more organic and almost disorganized in a way that I feels kind of liberating and freeing, like this big exhale. New York is such a 24/7 city. To be able to kind of come in and feel like you can, relax, and it feels also at the same time kind of fun and exhilarating. And then the stone reorganizes again as you move back towards the elevator lobby. So I think it's just that ability to have a little bit of playfulness that really drew me to the project. And working with these guys was a great thrill for me.
Well, I love that you felt empowered to take risks. And Michael, I've been neglecting you, but I'm going to bring you into the conversation. Tell me a little bit about the collaboration from your perspective.
The way I look at it is like when Kelly was first brought on the project, I was thinking like, what are they thinking that we're so different? And what was this all about? And I think it's important when 2 strong designers working out, they have to research each other. They have to understand where they're coming from. So I really researched Kelly, all her work, her product design. And when I discovered it was really cool, a lot of her product design, interiors and furniture are referencing Memphis design from the 1980s, which is the offshoot of postmodernism. And Ramsey is really famous for postmodernism in the 70s and 80s. And I thought this was really cool. And postmodernism is like the gateway drug for classical architecture. And our building's very classical. I call it modern classical. So I thought this was really cool. And also there's this like little bit of a tension between the interiors and exterior, which is quite refreshing. But there are also similarities the way we both design. I mean, Kelly does a lot of research in history. She looks at like avant-garde interiors and architecture from the 1930s. We do the exact same thing, which is fantastic. And I also noticed, I watched some of Kelly's videos, and she's very inspired. It's like her North Star film. And we're very much the same way. We also look at film, the whole idea of poetry, romance. We bring that to our buildings. And there's always this idea, our first buildings in Central Park, Fred and Ginger dancing on a terrace, overlooking Central Park. And this building picks up in the same attitude, but these wonderful terraces overlooking the park. And then when you get down to the details, we really work closely together. Like when you look at this grand room on the 2nd floor, we have the large arch, the 2 flanking windows, and Kelly took these ideas from the exterior, brought them into the interior, and makes them quite fresh. It looks like that really 1930s fresh look. And then on the next image, if you could go to it, Kelly designed a wonderful fireplace opposite the arched window, which sort of has these references from early 1930s interiors, and it has fluting wrapping around the fireplace, which picks up on the fluting on the exterior of the building, which we have on the pilasters.
No, it's very interesting to think about these, the sort of firm's legacy of postmodernism and modern classicism. And, I'll turn it over to Paul. I'm curious how 1228 Madison Avenue sort of fits into Ramsey's larger body of work, whether it's a continuation or a departure.
I've done a lot of buildings in New York, and we're so honored to have been hired to do these buildings. Our most famous building was perhaps 15 Central Park West, which sort of changed the real estate landscape of the city. It opened it up so that expensive apartments could be sold not just on the Upper East Side, but in other neighborhoods as well. But 15 Central Park West is a really big building. And at 15 Central Park West, I think of as being at the beginning of this new golden age of apartment and condominium design in New York, not since the 30s have such wonderful buildings been built. So that's a great example of sort of our entree into this world. On the left, Superior Inc. is an example of how we work in a different neighborhood and the West Village, where we use brick, and we're tying into the industrial qualities of the where the West Village meets the Hudson River. Bob earlier was talking about context and how important it is to us. These are all buildings for different neighborhoods. And then 20 East End Avenue on the right side is in a way leading us to 1228, because it's an Upper East Side building. It's really a building that is designed to fit into a complex Upper East Side urban context with clear walls and a complex set of setbacks above that, very similar to the projects I showed you earlier, 770 Park Avenue. And it's also a smaller building than the other two buildings. And one of the things that's happening in the market right now, which I think is great, is that the market is mature enough that developers can afford to do smaller buildings. And so it's very exciting for us to be able to do 1228, one of the smallest buildings, not the smallest buildings we've done in New York, with one residence per floor, and it's not that tall, and it fits very comfortably into a famous street. And we're so glad to be able to sort of be a part of the future of making Madison Avenue perhaps even more residential than it is right now, as it in a great residential neighborhood.
That's right. Well, as you mentioned, you have so much experience working in New York, in Manhattan, and Kelly, the same is very true for you. I'm curious, what do New Yorkers look for most in their homes? What do people crave?
I think as singular as I think New York is in the world, I don't know that people are seeking anything different than anywhere else. I think, we keep thinking about, and people refer to their home as a sanctuary, but I feel like now more than ever, boy, is that true. And I think you want your home to feel not just like a reflection of yourself, but you want to feel on a very primal and basic level. You want to feel safe, and you want to feel reassured, and you want to feel comfortable, and you want to feel protected in a way. And I think there's something about the layouts of these apartments, these residences, and that's something that we collaborated very closely with Bob and Paul and Michael on, and their whole team. Is there's a beautiful variety to the different floors and the residences, and there's numerous different types of layouts. But what I think is nice that runs throughout all of them is there's this kind of beautiful flow in the principal public spaces, as you see here, between the living, the dining, and the kitchen. And I think it really reflects the way most New Yorkers like to live. It's kind of a modern way of living. So the scale of the rooms is really beautiful. I would say that the bedrooms are laid out in a kind of perhaps more traditional way, which I think is really lovely. Mm-hmm. But I think that the way the public spaces have been designed and laid out really reflect how people want to live. And I'm just going to also say something that I remember very well from one of the early development meetings, Paul or Michael, but you guys were talking about the architecture. And I remember you were saying how, you could be on the street level and look up and be able to identify your home. Maybe it was you, Paul. And I was so moved by that, because I remember, just as a kid, and still to this day, there's something so kind of thrilling about being able to see your home from a distance and point it out. Hey, that's where I live. And I thought that was really so lovely. And I think because the architecture is so textured and rich, it's not like, I live in a high rise. And if I have to pick out my floor, I'm like, okay, 1, 2, 3, because it's all just stacked and it's all one on top of the other. This is really just like a home that's been, like a townhouse that's been stretched upward a bit. And I just thought that was such a lovely thing to be able to quickly and immediately tell that that's where I live. And I think that's something that's particularly lovely about this building.
That's right. Michael, I'm also curious to hear your thoughts, from an architecture standpoint, about what New Yorkers might want most in a home.
Well, I have to say what New Yorkers want most in a home. They want everything. I think New Yorkers are more. New Yorkers are more demanding than anybody in the country, probably the world, So they want everything. They want both traditional, they both want modern, traditional layouts. They expect absolutely everything. And they also expect the best in terms of design from the exterior to the interior. So they're very demanding on that. As I'm echoing what Kelly said earlier about sort of flexible layouts, like a kitchen could be open to the dining room and also you could close it off. They like that flexibility for entertaining. But I have to say many people in the rest of the country want that also. But I think they want absolutely the best. That's what's different about New York City.
Yeah, very true. New Yorkers want they want everything, but they also want something that nobody else has, and that brings us to the sort of topic of uniqueness. And I understand that many of the residences at 1228 are unique, and I'm curious how you all were able to sort of achieve this. And Kelly, we can start with you.
Yeah, again, that's one of the things that I think is particularly charming about this building. There are so many different layouts that respond to different ways to live. But I think, what we tried to bring, as Michael was saying, is so true. New Yorkers have sort of seen it all, and they can be a bit of a jaded bunch and a tough audience. And so we wanted to bring something to the interiors that did feel, timeless, which again is a nod to the architecture, which I feel the building sits so beautifully in the neighborhood. In terms of the interiors, we really tried to be very mindful about, for little things like bringing the chevron floors into the kitchen for that sense of warmth. There's all custom hardware from P.E. Garin, which is this kind of iconic old New York hardware company that still makes their handles in New York. And so all the door handles are P.E. Garin, have a beautiful feel in the hand. The materials, the marbles that we use, all very classic. And again, a nod back to the architecture, but we tried to use them in a way that felt a little bit different and fresh. Some of the secondary bathrooms have a beautiful arch at the tub, which I don't think I've ever seen before in a modern condominium. The kitchens, which I'm particularly excited about, has this little detail that seems small, but I think brings a real warmth to the kitchens. It's this very classic wood tambour detail that just it runs like a ribbon throughout the kitchen. I'm sorry, I know I'm jumping around here because we're looking at this beautiful living to family to terrace enfilade. I don't know if that's the right use.
Enfilade.
Oh my God, I have to be so careful around these guys. The
I know
terms I throw around, I get checked pretty quickly. Again, you see here, it's the scale and the light, and there's terraces, and a few apartments have fireplaces, and I don't know, the views. It's just there's something really magical about the building. That's all I can say.
Well, you mentioned enfilade, you mentioned, Saul. I'm curious to hear your sort of thoughts on what, how do you design to make a space stand apart?
Kelly, I thought it was great earlier that you remembered that conversation that we had about how important it is to us as architects to design a building where somebody could point up and say, I'm having dinner with Kelly, and that's her living room, and we're going to be out on that terrace before dinner and enjoying drinks afterwards. And we love that in a way that building like this becomes a town that you can read vertically. And you can see where all the different houses are on this vertical plane. That's something we try to achieve in all our buildings, but I think it's particularly successful in this building. And the floor plan here shows a plan that is a very particular place on the elevation. It shows that there are 2 bedrooms below, and there's a little den that's a kind of place where you can hang out and watch TV, and that it is open to a terrace. And on the facade, you can find that terrace, and you can find the 2 oval windows on either side of it. It's a very particular moment on the facade. It only happens once. This particular terrace at the end of this gallery next to these 2 bedrooms only happens once. And that's an example of how specific each of these apartments are and how special everybody is going to feel when they buy one of these residences. It is like a series of wonderful houses in a neighborhood, each similar, they hold together, but they're all individual just as all the people that live inside of them are individuals. And that individuality extends into the way that we detailed the outside of the building. Here we see a series of sketches that were done in developing the design. And as I pointed out, and Kelly pointed out, all these special places, the special places have to be marked on the outside of the building with great craft and with great care. On the upper left side, you see the design for a Juliet balcony that you can step out on, look down over Madison or look out over the park. On the upper right, you see how we're using limestone to gather together a series of different special rooms, perhaps master bedrooms, perhaps living rooms, and to create a gesture on the facade. On the lower left, you see the great swoop that comes down towards the bottom of the building that helps us to recenter the retail facade with the shifted tower. It's, I think, an interesting, quirky moment in the building, and it's related to the quirkiness of the street of Madison Avenue. And that swooping curve also creates a little private terrace for a master bedroom and a bathroom, so that that wall, it does a formal thing on the outside, as Kelly was saying, on the public side of the building, but also creates a really special moment on the inside of the building. And then finally, on the lower right, that just sort of showing all the care that went into designing the way that somebody enters the building, which I touched on a little earlier, that everybody wants to feel unique inside the building, but people want to also feel unique as they enter this building among all the other jewel boxes and really interesting structures of Madison Avenue.
Well, I dare say you've done Madison Avenue and New York proud. Bob, I have one final question for you. New York has been studied by historians for its resiliency through generations, and that resiliency has obviously led to some of the world's most beautifully designed buildings. I'm curious, in the context of the city today, and of course the city is ever changing, what does luxury mean to you right now?
Luxury means a sense of permanence, a sense of privacy, a sense of individuality of a person or a family, really. Those are many qualities I think we all seek in these particularly challenging times. But we can't design a building just for the moment. This building, 1228, and our other buildings are designed for the long haul. And luxury, I think Kelly has gone into it, and Paul and Michael, is a constellation of things: space, details, vistas, the relationship of one room to another, flow, and so on. So the nice thing about this building is it is truly luxurious, but in a very specific way. It is a piling up of townhouses. Each floor is, almost every floor, not all, is unique. So that's the luxury of individual space. And a great luxury of well-designed apartments is that you can take possession of your apartment and furnish it according to your own tastes, and the rooms will hold on to their character, and you will be able to enhance that character with your own particular take on it. So it can be what the architects have done, what the interior designer has put in place that's more or less permanent, and then it's what you as a new resident or as a second or third or fifth resident brings to bear. The luxury of having something that endures.
That's right. Well, very well said, Bob, as always. I want to thank you and Paul and Michael and Kelly for joining me. It's been a real pleasure to speak to you all. And for more information on 1228 Madison Avenue, we encourage you to visit our website and to contact the sales office. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.